You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lolana.
And you may know me as Mac Gerasimowicz.
One might indeed. And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 25 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, talking about Voltaire, talking about Fete, talking about kind of a sexual vitamin deficiency, which sounds like an It's Always Sunny, but it's not. Let's talk about poetry, Matt, today. Let's talk about the pre-revolution. Let's talk about, we've had a lot of kind of Tsarist era characters showing up here.
Yeah, we have, now that you kind of mentioned it. But this chapter, we get introduced to another one of the tenants in this city-like communal apartment. Someone else who is living in the same, apartments. I don't want to call it a complex. Living under the same roof and shared wall space as Zhenya. That's probably the best way to put it, I guess. Complex sounds too grand for what it was.
Yeah.
So this is Shagorodsky, and he is this sort of an aesthete. He's this guy who's really into poetry and art, and he is really kind of funnily compared to Krimov, who as an absolute Philistine. I mean, this man not only knows nothing about art, but couldn't know anything if he tried. Krimov, of course, Zhenya's former husband, who she kind of is down bad for in this chapter. So where to start with him? I'm really not sure. A few things. In the main thing on his characterization is just that he loves to read poetry, Fete being his favorite, and he loves to write his own and recite his own in a very dramatic fashion. And he also is completely useless. Not only useless, but utterly unhelpful to everybody that he meets. And the narrator says that he's the sort of man about whom people say he's got the soul of a child, or he's as kind as an angel. And yet he could walk straight past a hungry child or ragged old woman, begging for crust, feeling quite indifferent, still muttering his favorite lines of poetry. And this sort of makes me think back to this last chapter with Ludmila as the sort of witness of all this cruelty. And she's talking about, where does all this cruelty come from? And a lot of it, I think, is just this indifference. Now, the people in her chapter were granted a lot meaner to the people around them, but there's just a lot of this indifference. You're just so self-involved that you don't even notice. You don't even care to notice what's going on around you, which is, I should say, not just a Soviet phenomenon.
Yeah, that's a pretty modern one in all contexts. But also, I think, too...
Why does Gen Z walk around muttering their favorite lines of poetry? I can see the articles being written.
But also, I think, too, at least when I'm approaching this, you have not only Shagorodsky, but you also have Limonov coming in for a little bit more of an appearance. Limonov is the artist, who, what is he? Creative of some sort. The well-connected person that Zhenya in the previous chapter spoke to, was a friend of her father's.
Book lists him as a man of letters.
Man of letters, there we go. Who, after mentioning her plight to him, managed to get a organized thing such that she was finally able to get a residency permit. And in this chapter, he decides, well, I would like some payment for that. Hello, daughter of my good friend. What if perhaps you gave me a sexual favor in return for this? And when he's just kind of slowly just grabbing her body. Anyway, so we've got him, who's also this old kind of artiste, man of letters. And after Zhenya rebuffs him and he accepts it, Shagorodsky shows up, and the two of them fall in a conversation, and they get really into these older artists. And Zhenya almost has the sense that they're embarrassed that she's listening to them, that she's there at all. And when listening to them, she has this odd feeling that she suddenly understands Krimov better. She is utterly alienated from these two. It is almost Soviet in comparison. She's the Soviet representative here, because she doesn't really get them in comparison to her lived experience. When I'm looking at that, I could almost read that as, and I think this is arguable, a rebuff against anyone who's a little bit too idealized about the past or about the say cultural highs about the past, because it tends to be the case that when people look back at the past, they see certain cultural peaks, right, and not the other realities. And Zhenya, as much as she has previously been this sort of bohemian, in this book is almost a little more practical, at least practical by Soviet standards. She's bohemian by Soviet standards, given her life, but is still kind of Soviet. She's still of her society. She sees people who are out of place, children of another time, and she realizes she is still a child of this time. She feels off, but then she sees a real child of another time and realizes she still has a place here.
There was it made me think really of the thing that you posted yesterday on the Grossman and Pasternak, not debate, but just the difference, whatever book, the Popov book that you were reading from Vasily Grossman in the Soviet century, and the differences between the two sort of styles. And Grossman really is more, not necessarily like utilitarian, but he's more, he's clearer. And I think that this point is coming through, which is just sort of probing and asking the question, well, like, what use is art to us if it's not moving us in any direction, if it's not making you a better person, which is one of the claims that people make about 19th century, the Great Russian Golden Age. It has some ethical, moral something that we need to learn from to make us better, to make us more empathetic. And Will Grossman's saying, well, no, it clearly didn't. I mean, look at what people are like. They're not more empathetic. They're not better people for having read. As a matter of fact, the more you read, you can be just as bad as somebody else. You can be just as indifferent. And this is an interesting question to me, that he's sort of bringing in on the role of art. And I'm not going to solve it for you or for anybody, because no one solves it, because how could you? But it's an interesting question that he's starting to pose.
Yeah, we will not solve the art. We will not solve the problem of either art or morality for you in this series.
Once we solve how to use art, then we'll go back to what is art, and we'll do that in probably 1-2 episodes max. It's an easy one. No By one's the end, even talking about it. I hardly hear anyone pose that question. What is art?
Exactly. And once they don't answer that, they can't answer what is morality in art, and they can't answer what is morality in life. And once we get there, I mean, we've done it. You don't need to listen to anything else. You're done.
I feel like I could just hear like one of my boomer relatives just like screaming into the void. You wrote a whole dissertation about art. You don't even know what it is. And they're kind of right, honestly.
I think that's about all we had to talk about today. And from here we go to another Shvoshnikova sister, and we will be hearing an interesting tale about that tomorrow.
You'll hear from us again soon.
Hey, hey, hey.